Hello ladies and gentlemen, today I am going to be talking about 3 films in the same video. The 3 films are Mandy, Revenge, and Creed 2. The reason I want to talk about these movies together is because they all focus on a similar theme, that theme being revenge, and Mandy and Revenge are very similar in that they are both genre pictures, and I think I can best illustrate my feelings about both films while comparing them. And then at the end I will discuss Creed 2 because it's a little bit separate from those two in the sense of it's more of a franchise film rather than just a straight genre picture. So that's how I'll be structuring this video. Mandy is directed by Panos Cosmatos and it stars Nicolas Cage, and it is a story of a couple who is being attacked by a cult, and that cult is basically a devil-worshipping, demon-worshipping cult, and the character played by Nicolas Cage goes on a trek basically for revenge on how they've been treating him and his partner in this film. This was a movie that I was interested in, not personally, but a friend of mine who is a very big film buff, and he brought my interest to it, and he really loved the film. In fact, he said that this might be his favorite film of 2018. He said he saw it like 5 times in the theater, something around that number, and he really enjoyed this movie and was really passionate about it, and I'm like, okay, I'd love to see it too. He saw it in theaters. I saw it on a streaming service called Shudder, and Shudder is an exclusive service that basically it focuses more on thriller, horror-based films. Watching Mandy, it's a 2-hour movie, and watching this film I was excited from the very beginning, because the first opening there's a phrase, and I'm trying to remember what the phrase exactly is, but that one phrase in the beginning of the film got me really excited. It got me ready and feeling like, oh, this movie is going to be just pure rock and roll. It's going to be this incredible, gory, big, bold film that I'm just going to gush over, and I was going to be really excited about it. I was really excited about it going into it. And that excitement dissipated very, very slowly. This is a movie that moves very slowly in the beginning. And by the beginning, I mean the first hour and 15 minutes. Honestly, I was very disappointed with Mandy. The opening of the film got me really excited and really got my mind prepared to watch this movie that was going to be so intense and so vibrant and so explosive. That's what I was expecting from the opening. What I got instead, the feeling I was having was a very somber, the best way I can illustrate this, it's very difficult to explain what I was having an issue with this, and what I was having an issue with was this film looks really good for the most part. There's a few effects in this that are a little bit jarring for me, just visually it's a little bit jarring. Even on my laptop it's a little tough to watch those and just kind of not get away with a headache. But the lighting in this film is very, very interesting. It's kind of stuff that you see in like a Nicholas Winding Refn movie like Drive, The Neon Demon, or Only God Forgives. Those kinds of movies like have this really bright colors and they show off shadows. It's adding production to minimalism, which I really respect. And what I thought was so cool about this movie was the sense of mood that those lights kind of incorporate. I liked that kind of feeling that the lights gave me. But that was really it. The issue with this film that I was having was that I could care less about what events occurred. I could care less what happened with the couple. I could care less about what happened with the cult, because to me they were just crazy cult with crazy things, and it's like, oh, that's not normal. And for me, it just didn't go anywhere beyond that. There was nothing holding my emotions for this film. I just didn't care about what was happening. It's just a slow burn in the first like hour and 15 minutes, and I walked out of that experience in the first hour and 15 just like, what should I care about with these people, about the main couple? What should I care about them? I know the girlfriend or the wife, she's she suffered something. Like, she's been traumatized and she's dealing with some kind of pain. But I don't care. There's nothing for me to care about. And that isn't against, like, the performance or anything. I think the performance is fine. It's just, okay, in the Shudder version that I was watching, I was paying attention and looking through the collection that they have, and they actually have a behind-the-scenes discussion about the creating of this film. And the director, Panos, he had a moment where he was mentioning how, to him, a story is the most uninteresting part of a film. It's the way you tell that story that makes it interesting. Now, I agree to a certain extent. I don't think a story is the most uninteresting thing. I think it has always been, like, stories are the thing that we have, you know. Growing up for, like, centuries, stories are what we've constantly had. And it does come down to how you tell it, how you illustrate it, and all of that. Like, that's, to me, that's common knowledge, for me at least. The problem for this movie, and the way I think of it, is, imagine there's a turkey leg. Okay? There's a turkey leg in a room, and it's on this podium, and the turkey leg is just hovering over the top of the podium, and there's a whole bunch of lights around it, and it's creating this really weird kind of feeling inside of you. It's showing the bone in, like, certain angles in certain ways, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so intense, like, seeing it this way. And there's no meat on the bone. There is a center to it. There is that core thing of the bone, but there's no meat to it. There's nothing that, you know, stripping it down. You can strip the bone down, but, like, there's no meat, like, no sustenance. That's what I was having for this film. Even after the first hour and 15 minutes, when 45 minutes into this movie was kind of what I was hoping to have done, I just didn't care. There's a lot of gruesome, gory, action-packed moments in this film. They're shot very well. You can see the action. It's really is entertaining, but I'm glancing over my laptop and just like, okay, I'm going to make myself some tea right now. Because I don't care. I know what's going to happen. There's going to be, like, blood flying everywhere. There's going to be intense violence, but I just don't care about it at that point. It was just such a disappointing experience, and just left me feeling hollow. Not necessarily just because, I just watched this really hard film that was really hard to take. It just didn't do anything for me. I didn't walk away feeling like I learned anything, that I experienced anything. It was just this big flashy thing that didn't have anything to make me care about it. And I was considering this film in the context of a genre picture. I wasn't considering this and be like, oh, but you're thinking of it in the grand scheme of, like, art in general, and or like, you're just generalizing movies in this, and you're not considering what kind of film it is. No, I am. Like, and that's the reason I need to compare it to Revenge, which in my opinion is a much superior movie and a much superior genre picture. Revenge is directed by Coralie Farja. It is also a debut film, which Mandy was to Panos. Revenge is a movie about a young woman who is the mistress of a married man who is taken to this resort in the desert, basically, just so they can, fool around. And then two men show up later who are the hunting buddies of another man. Now, these two men assault and brutally rape this woman, and then she is left for dead in the desert until the spirit of vengeance kind of, like, reinvigorates her, and she now has an opportunity to go on a revenge spree on these men who have wronged her. Similar with Mandy, it took me a while to get into the movie, or at least to get invested. However, with Mandy, while it was an hour and 15 minutes, Revenge, it was only 20 minutes. The reason it was 20 minutes, like, again, the first 20 minutes, I could care less about the characters. They were just flat individuals with nothing holding on to me. They were just, the girl was pretty. The guy was rich and handsome. The one guy was a little fat and creepy, and the other guy was really creepy. That was all they were to me in the first 20 minutes, until the film takes a complete 180 of itself after that first 20 minutes. the girl who was this object of physical desire only, became this image that we emotionally desired. I emotionally desired for her to take revenge out on these men. The men I was also caring about too, because they are a little bit nervous. They're concerned about what's going to happen to them. So they're trying to do their best to fix this up, but they're still struggling with this. They're always like paranoid about what's going on with themselves and with the situation of the desert. It's so well handled. And what's really great is the guys in this movie are smart. This is a revenge story that's similar to Rambo, where the antagonists are very, very like capable. And a reverse of Rambo, though, is that the woman is not fully capable. She's not necessarily the complete badass that you see in Kill Bill, that she can just take on the entire world. She's really suffering in this movie. She has to find makeshift ways to survive. As the film was going on, I was feeling the intensity of that person's desire to live and their fears of being caught. There's a scene in this movie that was so difficult just to watch, and yet I was like really excited to see what the woman was going to be gaining out of the experience. This movie also, similar to Mandy, is incredibly violent, but the lights are much brighter, so the violence is like, you see so much blood. Like, I haven't seen a movie that this violent since Passion of the Christ. It is that bloody and that over-the-top violent, but also it's not like showy like Kill Bill. It's very just intense. Not just intense, but it's also just very like the effects are not done like a woman's arm getting cut off wouldn't give it like spraying a hose of blood everywhere. It would just be like blood coming out from the actual veins the way it would come out. There is a little bit of suspension of disbelief you have to do, but it's a genre picture, and that's where the idea of the genre picture, the argument for a genre picture comes in. I can suspend my disbelief when someone goes through a intense physical trauma and is able to get up a little bit later on, because that's the kind of film that we're getting set up for. It's that kind of movie. The issue with Mandy that I was having, and with this movie that I don't have, is, you know, I care about the characters in Revenge. In a position where the girl was just being filmed as a pretty woman, and she was just like half naked all the time. And she's like bleached blonde, you know, girl. And I'm just like, where do I care about this? And the movie puts her in situations that make me care. It's not trying to just assume that the audience is picking up on all the things that you want to bring across. But Coralie knows how to film this movie and what elements to add that allow the audience to empathize and to almost sympathize with the lead in this, and even the villains to a certain extent. The villain, this movie has one of the best villains of this year in my opinion. When they were revealed to show that darker side of themselves, like just how far they will go, the movie became infinitely more interesting. And there was somewhere for the villain to go. Unlike with Mandy, the villains peaked. And there wasn't anywhere else for them to go except just to be more crazy. And just to yell more. And that's something I think is very important to understand when it comes to crafting a good villain. You don't want them to peak in the beginning. Because if they peak, then they've shown you how far they're willing to go, and then it's just a matter of how soon will they be killed. It's much more interesting to see the villain grow as your protagonist is growing. They're going at the same time, so you're constantly on edge. This movie also has a very brilliant tracking shot where the entire setup of one area is mapped out to us, so that if we're paying attention enough, which I was, we see the entire layout of one area, and then the tension is in us during a sequence that involves this area because we know what the rules are of this place, and we understand where it can go, the restrictions of it, and we understand how the characters have to navigate those restrictions. There's a near 20-minute scene in this movie that is just pure intensity. Actually, there's more than that. There's even a chase scene that is just brilliantly done. And what I love about this movie, too, similar to what I love about any film that involves violence, like in Pulp Fiction, where Marvin's head explodes in the back of the car, the violence in this movie affects how the characters have to work in situations. For example, there's a scene where somebody is shot in their right shoulder. Now, there's a reason they had to be shot in their right shoulder, because they shoot with their right hand. And when they bring up a rifle, they have to shoot with it. But the problem is that with that bullet, with the amount of blood they're losing, with that feeling, they can't properly aim. And it gives them a disadvantage, but it gives our other character an advantage. But then we realize that they're still functional. And like, I can't say it without revealing it, but that person shows that they're still functional even with the wound. They're just not as precise. That kind of element in terms of violence is where I really have to praise the director for this movie. I have to praise that attention to detail in making that choice to make it clear that the results of the violence will affect the person, at least in the moment that they're in. It might not affect the entire scope of the situation, which is fine, but it will affect the moment that's happening now. And what I really liked was, actually, this is something I liked, wasn't saying it was great. It was actually, there's some really awesome symbolism in this movie, but then there's some editing that's thrown into it that kind of goes, okay, it just doesn't, it's not required. We can pull in based on our understanding of what, images do. If we've paid attention during English class, we can understand the what is being shown to us. So that was one thing that I thought was just a little bit more just reliance that your story and your directing is really, really good. I think that's all that was needed in this movie, and I thought that the lead was really good. I think she does a great job. There's moments where she doesn't even talk. She just has to convey with her emotions and her eyes, and she does a very good job at that. And I think the supporting characters are really good as well. And overall, Revenge was a delightful experience, despite the fact that it was incredibly violent, but it was an experience that I genuinely was happy. And I watched it on the same format on my laptop, and yet I was glued to the screen the entire time. I thought I was just going to be able to do things while it was playing on the background. Couldn't do that. I had to sit down and watch it. So I recommend you check out both of these films, both Mandy and Revenge. However, I think Revenge is a movie that there is more to revisit, where Mandy, I think, is a movie that on repeated viewings will start to drag, and the stuff that the symbolism or the message and the core of the story when it shows itself will just be like, okay. And then unfortunately the events that take place won't be as impressive, I think, on repeated viewings. And now I want to talk about Creed 2. I really have wanted to talk about Creed 2 for at least a week now, but I needed to just let myself sit with this movie for a bit to think about how I really felt about it. Creed 2 is directed by Stephen Caple Jr., and it is, I believe Ryan Coogler produced it. It is the story of Adonis Creed coming up to face against the son of Ivan Drago. And if you don't know anything about the Rocky franchise, which surprisingly a lot of people who have seen this movie that I've talked to have not seen the Rocky franchise, Ivan Drago is the man who murdered Adonis's father, Apollo Creed, in Rocky IV. This was my most anticipated movie of the year. Ever since I saw Creed, I fell in love with Creed when I saw it. I think that movie is highly underappreciated for just how great of a film it is. It's one of those movies that I see it. I want to talk about that movie a lot more, but I'm gonna make up for not talking about Creed by talking about Creed 2. This movie was incredible. I love this film. What usually happens for me when I watch movies that are like drama based is sometimes I will go in with a feeling of, is this movie going to make me feel something? And for the Rocky films, that's a little tough. The Rocky films for me are kind of a mishmash between great films and really bad films. But there's something about them that has this, similar to the other films I've just discussed. There is a core to Creed 2 that I think dominates most franchise films today. I think there's a heart behind it. Even in some of the lesser films, there's always this heart that I can feel of just this character of Rocky. And I think that Michael B. Jordan added that an extra heart to that with Creed, and understanding the passion behind both of these characters, Rocky and Adonis, and seeing how they have to deal with their situations in life is such a powerful, moving experience for me. I actually teared up in this movie. I was almost crying. I think I did cry without consciously saying I'm crying. It just happened. I was empathizing so much with Adonis that he just allowed for me just to feel what he was feeling, the pain, the anger, the frustration, the betrayal, that everything that he's been feeling in his life just colliding all at once. Because understanding what the power of the Drago family name, what that name means to both Rocky and to Creed, is, if you understand it, then you will come out or go into this movie understanding that this is basically a fight that has needed to happen for years. The power of Rocky 4, what it came out. Like, that movie was kind of ridiculous because it was coming out when, America and Russia were having odds. And it was a movie that when my father saw it in theaters, people literally cheered in the theater, shouted and go, "Woo!" when Rocky fights the Russian. That fight is one of the greatest fights to people of the Rocky franchise. And because of what it signified. But that was a base signification. This is a signification of a man facing the fighter, the offspring of the man who took something from him that in the first Creed movie he was rejecting wholeheartedly. And now in Creed 2, he's accepted who he is in his past. And now it is so ingrained in him and something that he has defended. And he's defended the title of Creed now. And now here he is having to face the foe that destroyed his father. And has caused him so much emotional suffering. There are two things in this movie I didn't care for. There's a jump in the movie in terms of the time between understanding the character of Bianca, played by Tessa Thompson, and understanding the relationship she has had with Michael B. Jordan. And there's a jump in the time that I'm just like, okay, that was quick. And I understand why it was quick, but it was too quick. I think that it was an exposition dump that I think we could have been shown a little bit better. There's a moment that not bothered me, but just I noticed that it was just kind of like, I didn't need that. When Rocky talks to Adonis about a fighting style, this is literally just a little moment of shared dialogue. Rocky mentions this punch, or this kind of fighting, in Creed, the first one. In this really great long take fight, he mentions that his father did a move on Rocky that worked. And hearing that in Creed, it registered really, really well. And I remember that line. And then they just repeat that moment in this film in almost the same way. And I'm like, oh, I know that because you told me last time. I don't need to hear that again. At least not in the same way. It was delivered almost in the exact same way. And that's where I'm like, oh, okay, you didn't need that. You could have said go this route, and then Creed would have been like, oh, I understand exactly what that means, as opposed to explaining to us again what that signifies. But those are the only issues I had. There are a few details in this movie that I really want to discuss, however, because I feel like this movie is being overly criticized for the wrong reasons. I think this movie is phenomenal, and I think if people can understand a little bit of the context of why moments are as big as they are, I think this movie is actually a lot better than most people say. There's a moment involving the steps that Rocky has run up to, basically making the iconic image of him like putting his arms up. Those steps are a huge signifier of the Rocky franchise, and they're in this movie. And if you have any understanding of the Rocky films up until this point, you know why one moment in this film is the most terrifying moment of any Rocky film I've ever seen, of any fight in the Rocky films I've ever seen. I haven't even talked about the antagonist yet. It is so non-glorious. This film is not as epic feeling in terms of the cinematography as the first Creed was, for good reason. It shouldn't look that way because it is so brutal and so... Oh, gosh, I was shuddering during the fight scenes in this film, like when Drago's son, when I forget his name, but Drago is just punching people and breaking them, just severely. Like, I was absolutely rattled by this man, this thing in the ring. It was intense. When Adonis was being punched, or when any fighter was being punched in this movie, I moved my head. I was feeling those hits on my face, and I could understand the level of power of this man just from how he was being filmed, and just from the performance of this individual who was just physically dominating on the screen. And what's even more impressive is this movie made me empathize with that character at the exact same time. Similar to how I feel about the first Rocky versus Rocky 2, I personally feel that in Rocky 4, Ivan Drago is just a thing that Rocky needs to fight. It's like in the first Rocky where Apollo Creed is just something that, he's got to fight. That's it. In this movie, Creed 2, the foe becomes more charged with its own motivation, where we understand where the villain is coming from, the antagonist is coming from, and we understand where the protagonist is coming from. And that makes the clash more epic. We have the hero, but we understand why the villain has to fight. Not wants to, has to fight. That's the difference between any one of these Rocky films. The best Rocky films come down to where they have to fight rather than do they want to fight. I don't care if they want to fight, but if they have to, then that's what the core is for Rocky. From all of the films, with exception to a few, he needs to fight in order to survive, in order to exist. That kind of feeling is powerful, and it's felt in this movie. I think I haven't even discussed the thing about this movie that I need to talk about right now. Michael B. Jordan is one of the best actors working in film in his generation today. He's the kind of actor that I've seen in a lot of projects now where he just walks in a room and he needs to be there. It's not even a matter of, why is this character here? When he walks in the room, you know why he's there. When he's on screen, you know he needs to be there. He's got a great sense of physical presence, and he uses every moment of while he's just in a room. Even in films of his that I've not been a fan of, he's incredibly just a presence. And he doesn't need to work that hard for it. In his moments where he's just dealing with the frustration, he doesn't need to work at all. It just feels like the most natural feeling he needs to go through. And there's a moment in this movie, there's like 7 moments in this movie where he's just working through the most pain, the most suffering that I've ever seen any character in any of these films suffer through. In any film suffer through, and he's just doing it as if it's natural. It's not something he needs to work for. He doesn't need to think of what's my previous circumstances with this. It's all just ingrained in his body and in his soul and his heart, and he's just letting it go, but he's still holding on to it for that character integrity. He knows how to approach this character. He is Adonis Creed, the same way Sylvester Stallone is Rocky Balboa. Tessa Thompson in this movie is also a very good partner in this film. She's expressing herself and her character almost the same way. Like, they're the perfect match, where Adrian and Rocky, one was shy and one was kind of like, the bigger presence. Tessa Thompson is just as important of a character, not necessarily just in terms of how she presents herself, but in terms of what her character is and what she signifies. And while Adonis loves her, there are some big issues that they have to deal with. And I'm not talking about the issues that I feel like are the weaker issues of the Rocky films, where man has to go fight, woman has to not fight. Like, that's not the issue. The issue is stemming from her hearing in the first movie, and it's heartbreaking to see that in this film. It's the kind of thing you have to overcome, and yet you can't punch it away, which is what I love in these movies so much, when they add that kind of extra layer of an issue you can't get away with physically. You can't solve it by fighting, and yet they still have that reason of, like, you need to fight. These movies could easily just be like, well, why are they fighting? You could question what the purpose is of fighting. It could become like Rocky Balboa to me, which that movie has a lot of heart, but I don't think there's any reason for any fights to occur in that film. It could just become overloaded with so much heart, then you're like, well, why do they need to fight? No, you understand why this fight needs to happen. You may not want it to, but you know it does. And one thing I just thought of, another thing that I was just kind of like, okay with for this movie was there's a promoter in this film, and the performance is good. The character is, he's the promoter, but he's just kind of that character that I just realized was like, meh. But overall, every performance in this film was great, especially from Sylvester Stallone, who just is Rocky. He doesn't need to do anything for this character, like, in terms of, like, try to put on any airs or anything. He just knows what to do. He just drops into it. It's incredible to see that, and to see him be able to still play this role and still grow as the films progress is just wonderful. Last thing I'll say, actually, this is the last thing I will say, to stress how good this movie is. This movie makes Rocky IV, which is a film that was nominated for a Razzie for Worst Picture, it makes that film that was so cheesy in terms of, like, how it was presenting itself, a legitimately great film with a terrible robot in it. Like, I don't know how else I can praise a movie by saying that it made a bad film or a really just, like, guilty pleasure film actually have some substance and actually want me to revisit, to be like returning to this film and seeing the effects of it and really understanding the power of it. Like, that to me is the best thing I can say about a movie and a franchise, rather than the movie detracting from previous elements. And I recommend you own this film in your collection. And the other thing I'll say, where I talked about Infinity War and said how if you buy that movie, you're basically buying into the entire franchise of Marvel. If you buy this movie, you're going into the entire franchise of Rocky. However, this is the movie that I think inspires people to have to get the entire collection. It's not a matter of, maybe I don't know if I want to see all those films in the franchise. No, this is a movie that you need to own, and you need to get the entire franchise of Rocky. I really appreciate you guys hearing what I had to say about these 3 films. I hope you seek them all out for yourself to form your own opinions of them. Thank you all so much for watching this. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, all that fun stuff. And as always, take care.